Theodore Kaczynski, also known as Ted, and also known as the Unabomber, who bombed countless individuals and properties, was born on the 22nd of May 1942 in Evergreen, Illinois. Kaczynski was born to working-class parents Wanda Teresa and Theodore Richard Kaczynski. Aside from suffering with severe hives at a very young age, Ted was a good child, according to his parents, who had a loving affection for animals and showed great levels of sympathy to animals who were locked in cages. Ted's mother hypothesized that this was as a result of Ted's own experience of being in hospital isolation from an early age. In Ted's youth, he excelled in mathematics and in 1962 obtained a degree from Harvard College, achieving a GPA of 3.12. He then moved on to study his master's and doctorate degrees in the University of Michigan during the times of 1964 and 1967 respectively. Over the course of his time throughout university, Kaczynski began to develop sexual feelings towards women and in turn, on impulse, decided to undergo a gender transition from male to female. All was prepared and ready to go, and Kaczynski went to speak to a psychiatrist. However, on the day of the meeting, Kaczynski abruptly called off the transition. He then stated that he had intense feelings to kill his psychiatrist and anybody else around him that he did not like. Ted stated that this was the first turning point in his life. In 1967, Ted Kaczynski became an assistant professor at the University of California, where he taught mathematics. A year later, he was then appointed as the senior professor. However, according to a questionnaire, Kaczynski was not liked by his students. He then abruptly resigned. Strangely, Ted then completely changed his lifestyle and went completely rural. He exclaimed that he wanted to live as primitive a life as possible. He lived in a 10 by 12 foot cabin with no heat, electricity, or running water. According to sources, Kaczynski would read. All he would do is read. According to other sources, Kaczynski would write. All he would do is write. This reading and this writing scarily turned into the manuscript for what would later be known as the Unabomber Manifesto. In 1978, Ted carried out the first of his heinous acts. He moved and began to work in Chicago in the same factory as his brother, and this was where the first Unabomber package was delivered. Although the bomb was not as high a level as it would eventually be, this bomb, labeled to an engineer professor at the Northwestern University, exploded, severely injuring a police officer. The reasoning for this detonation by Kaczynski was not explained. During the same year, and the following year, Kaczynski sent 2 more Unabomber packages, one to the American Airlines, which exploded on a flight in which 12 passengers inhaled non-lethal smoke, and the second directed to the President of the United Airlines. Thankfully, both were non-deadly attacks. At this point, suspicions arose with federal investigators, and a task force was set up, known as Unabomb. Over the next 8 years, Unabomb found it very difficult to obtain any sort of grip on who was causing all the havoc around the US. The main reason for this was due to the complex and technically sound construction of the bombs that were being used. Essentially, after detonation, no remnants of any physical debris was left. Therefore, the Unabomb task force could never obtain any physical evidence of the bombs. In addition, in relation to the eyewitness testimonies provided by those who were either injured by the bombs or those who witnessed the explosions, the only information that could be gathered was that the suspect would wear a hoodie pullover and sunglasses. Throughout this period of 8 years and countless bombings, the following were either injured or sadly lost their lives: Percy Wood, Janet Smith, Diogenes Angelikos, John Hauser, James McConnell, Niklaus Swino, Hugh Scruton, Gary Wright, Charles Epstein, David Galernta, Thomas Mosser, and Gilbert Brent Murray. In 1995, the Unabomb Task Force received an unexpected lifeline. The New York Times received an anonymous request from an individual claiming to be the Unabomber. The individual stated that they would discontinue the relentless bombing at the request that any large newspaper or magazine published a 35,000-word anti-technology manifesto. The New York Times then assisted the Washington Post with the publication of this manifesto. This decision was a difficult one to make for the publication teams. The reason it was so difficult was because this manifesto presented ideas that criminals could potentially use in the future. However, in the short term, to save lives in the present, it was deemed the right thing to do. Once the manifesto had been published, the brother of Ted Kaczynski found resemblances of his brother's writing in the manifesto, and as a result contacted the federal investigators along with the Unabomb task force. Eventually, as a result of the tip-off provided by Kaczynski's brother, Ted was found in his cabin and was arrested. A tremendous amount of evidence was seized, including descriptions of the targets, drafts of the manifesto, as well as parts of the bombs themselves. On the 22nd of January 1998, Ted Kaczynski pled guilty to all charges and in turn was handed a life sentence without the possibility of parole.